Okay, so so we're doing Nietzsche and this, was it lying in the non-moral sense, and we're talking about the need for survival. So when I was walking into this superstore and I was seeing all of this pack action going on, the white domestics were grouping together and unspoken body language was just screaming at each other. Somewhere I'm sure there was whispered, do this, do that, just to be sure. They didn't mistreat the customers at all. But there was that guarded sense, that fear of the unknown. And I thought when I was watching this unfold before me, I thought of Stuart Hall and Race the Floating Signifier, which is a talk that he has. It's a lecture that's it's available on YouTube. I highly recommend it. I might post a link to get to the first part of it, and you work your way through it. But what he says is, or what he suggests is, or argues, is that whenever we see a person, particularly a person of color, but any person, it doesn't matter, our ideology, and I'm using different words, so I'm paraphrasing, but our ideology has constructed us and given and informed us to read a human body as a text. And what that means is that whenever you see somebody, you have all this baggage that you're carrying with you that you feel as if you know something about them. Now, you don't really know anything about them at all, but you will assume if they be female, if they be male, if they be tall, if they be short, if they are handicapped, if they are white, if they are black, if they are young, if they are old, if they're middle age, do they dress well, do they not dress well. There's this assumption that because you have all these social cues, these signifiers at your disposal, and everybody's been neatly categorized, that you know something about them. And that's a real danger. I find that's a real danger. And as much as we try to get outside of that, we are interpolated by media, which Stuart Hall and Bell Hooks works with quite a bit, to where we are given this from the time we are young. We're born into a certain area, and we, from that center point, which is something Charles Olson kind of gets at, you have to find your place in the world, or you're given a place in the world, is more like it. And from that place in the world, that's the center of the universe. That right there is the point of the compass to which everything else around you circles. And when you are in that situation to where you're in that privileged position of relating to the world, a part of it is you're constructed. You're constructed by the family, the social economics of your family dynamics, whether you were male, whether you were female, whether you were born urban or suburban or country, which culture you come from. And culture, all of these things are constructs other than your genetics. You're born male or female, and you're born from your parents. Like, those things are not constructed per se. So you're given this information on how to relate to the world. So if you're a black person born in a black community, in a black country, you'll relate to black people very differently than a white person who's born in a white country that never sees a black person until you happen, by happenstance, tend to run into them. And there's, folk tales, and there's news media now, which is, which we all know is just nothing but a big fat fairy tale. There's some truth to it, but really we get a digested version for our consumption. And you have novels, you have movies, you have video games, you have all of these different forms of media that are telling you and giving you these cues, and that's been passed on since your great-great-great-great-grandparents. There's a great lineage all the way back to the medieval and beyond to the classic on how to other people, how to relate to the world. So then by the time it comes to you and you're interpolated into existence, you've got the mirror effect. Everybody around you is reinforcing what you believe, what you've been taught to believe, because when we come into this world, we're just wild little animals, and we are taught to behave. We are constructed into the people we are. So that by the time you wind up in a superstore and you have people thrust upon you that you're not used to, and you are migrated by force of necessity due to capitalist drive, so that you're migrating around trying to make a living. By the time that happens, you have a lot of baggage to when you actually see somebody. You read their body as a text and you feel you know something about them. Even if you've been told, you don't know this, but you know this. And then you feel that kind of guilt. There's a lot of white privilege, but there's also a lot of white guilt that I saw at play in this situation. And I'm not saying all races don't have or shouldn't have. I think they all should have some kind of guilt that goes with their privilege. I would say it's most obvious. It was most obvious in this situation. So that there was this look of, are you one of us or one of them, going on between everybody, and it really hit me when the color folks popped me out, and I realized at that moment, one of my friends, that word incognito, one of my friends told me a long time ago, is incognito because I have so many different genetic making ups, or ingredients in my makeup. But I can just pass as an everyday white person, and they thought that was really funny because I grew up in a black inner city neighborhood. But there are things that people from ethnic groups can actually figure out that I'm ethnic. I mean, to them it's really freaking obvious. So that's where a mask, a lie, and a life come from, because I'm not under any illusions that there hasn't been that white privilege extended to me. And I just think it makes it easier. There's that othering. I read a book called Get 'Em All, Kill 'Em All. I did a thing on Guatemala, and how does an everyday person become somebody who would allow atrocities like what happened with the Nazi concentration camps? How does that happen? And it was very interesting, and it talks about that pack instinct and that fear of the unknown. And whenever something happens and there's a trauma in a society, the easiest thing to do is say, those people who aren't like us are responsible. And there's this alignment to who we believe is the strongest. Whether we like them or not, that is not the point. And it makes no difference. That there is something in us that will make us align to someone that we believe our self-preservation can be ensured by if we get behind them. So if you think of a pack of dogs, if you have an alpha dog and he's challenged by a potential alpha dog and they start fighting, most of the pack will step back. But as soon as one of those dogs obviously is going to be the top dog, the other dogs will join in and attack the dog that is not the alpha. And it's a matter of aligning with the one that will lead you to food, preservation, security, continuity. So that kind of throws into question the self and the individual. We live in a society where everybody thinks they have a privileged self, a privileged position, and that they are interpolating themselves, that they're not made up, they're not constructed. But yet I find all of these things are true with, simple observation of how people align on university campuses. People from other cultures click together, that they try to find people who are most similar to them. And I think part of it is comfort. It's much easier to, if you enjoy a certain food and you enjoy a certain music and everything, I think that's a huge part of it. But I've heard conversations and stuff, and it's not always necessarily so. There is this sense of self-preservation that's involved. So anyway, that was that poem. And so yesterday when I standing there and I asked the gentleman, will you read a poem, let me interview you. He said yes. He pulled out the poem, and I was like, so, and then he just started reading. So I sat there and watched him read this, and I was like peeked over his shoulder, like over the camera to see which one he was doing. I was like, great, what are the odds? And fate, if you believe in fate, which I don't, but we'll say fate, decided, random chaos, and I guess would be better with a capital K, decided that this was the poem he needed to read. So the one time I go back to New Minas, the first person I interview, they pick up the one poem that was most personal and awkward. So I sat there watching him read this, and the whole time I'm thinking, is he going to recognize me for who I really am, or is he going to be offended? Is he going to have a conversation about it? So that was the poem he read, and it was about a relationship that I had briefly had, because I believe anytime you interact with people, it is a relationship, as fleeting as it is. It's proverbial, shopping one night stand, but it lasts seconds sometimes. I wondered, was he going to see himself in this poem, and was he going to be able to pick me out of the poem? So he read it, and yeah, as you saw from the post, and he actually liked it. And then afterwards, we had a whole conversation about he's from Toronto, but he's actually from Jamaica, and he leaves on Friday to go back to Toronto, and then he's coming back and would like to get together and actually have deep conversation about poetry and what was going on in this poem, but then he had to go because his group was there. So there was that, you know, and I felt that wasn't that the condition of a migrant worker, right? You try to make connections, but you're constantly being moved and everything, and that was very telling for me, that, you know, the desire to have a conversation about something that intellectually stimulates you is kind of withheld. And I thought, how lucky. That was my takeaway, that I'll be here and I will talk with him, because I think it's going to be a fascinating experience, probably more for me than him. But how lucky we are to live in a place where we can actually indulge ourselves in moments of self-actualization and intellectual vacationing, for the most part, and to not be moved about. And that, but part of me is a gypsy, as anybody who's watching this knows, that I'm always constantly on the move. And then I thought, well, maybe we're not that lucky, because this gentleman is going to constantly be coming in contact with things that challenges his perceptions, and meeting new people and learning new things in that very primordial Tennessee Williams catastrophe of success kind of way, to where he'll always be in that primordial ooze, and he'll constantly be engaging life in the fullest sense, in the realest sense, knowing, you know, that he is mortal, and that the struggle to survive is a very real part of his life. So everything would be like hypersensitive, intense, vibrant, vivid. And then I thought, you know, we're lucky but we're not, and he's lucky but we're not. And in the big scheme of things, at the end of all of this, I thought, isn't that just the human condition? That we'll never be able to make that connection 100%, but we can make a connection. And I can never be him, and he can never be me, but we can have meaningful, deep conversation. And that's when I came back to Stanley Cavell, who's a brilliant man, brilliant man. And he believes you only can find yourself not in solitude and isolation, like romantics believed, but they had friends that they went off in isolation with, so they were never really a man alone. But it's in those deep, personal, connected, vulnerable, hard, true conversations that is where we discover who we are. And there's no escaping the fact that we are pack animals. So that's when you challenge your beliefs, that's when you learn new things about what it is to be human. Because you can go and you can learn what it is to be a wolf, but you'll never be a wolf. There's no way you'll ever be a... If we can't understand each other, never going to understand what it's like to be a wolf. But you can really learn a lot about yourself and grow as a human, not because you really can understand that person, but they can point things out to you that are flaws or strengths. And you can challenge yourself, change yourself, grow those areas. So this entire takeaway, that is what I got. And that's why this poem's probably going to get the most of my attention, because it involved the theory, it involved reality, it involved talking and touching with people and observing people. So that's a lot of rambling. I think I'm kind of done. I'll be back probably to add more theory to it later. Thanks.